All right, so I want to preface this by saying that I'm a fan of RJ at the fourth age, and he's really good at articulating what makes a good hero, particularly from the Western point of view and the Western tradition. He provides lots of information and sources for his opinions, and like I said, I'm usually right there on board with him for a lot of stuff. But his recent video on Chainsaw Man, which I'm gonna preface that too, I'm a fan of RJ's, and I'm not a fan of Chainsaw Man. I got nothing against it. I read the first chapter, first volume, I think for just the first chapter, and it wasn't for me. I might pick it up later, but right now I'm not a huge fan of it. So I've got no dog in the fight either way. But I took some issue with his reasoning in this video for his not liking of Chainsaw Man. So I'll get right to the video. I'll let you see what he's discussing. I've skipped to about 13 minutes in, because a lot of it is just he's prefacing his take with the story of Chainsaw Man. He kind of lays it out, and I think people that are fans already know that, and people who aren't fans don't really need to know that, because the points I'm addressing that he brings up don't pertain solely to Chainsaw Man, so I'm not going to be defending Chainsaw Man. I'm going to be responding to his larger problems. So let's get into it.
Great. But that's not really where I'm going with this. The point is, I'm not looking at this according to Japanese understanding or anything else. I'm looking at it through the eyes of people who like this series in the Western world. And they are calling him not just a protagonist, but a hero of the story. And I'll have to say, this character is not a hero in any way.
All right. So I'll let RJ explain himself, but here's where it's going to split off, because it's the way he defines hero that I think I take issue with. So let's get to it.
Here's why. And here's where I get into the esoteric bits of what it is to be a hero according to Western definitions, which are based upon logic and reason and the understanding of reality. If you want reference to those points, go back to Aristotle's treatises on comedy and tragedy and how they branch off into his other works. So, as I'm always going on about, the traditional idea of a hero in the Western world is a paragon of virtue. Those virtues are very specific in number and order. They are preceded by right reason, which is to say, reason in accord with reality. That can lead you to prudence, which is correct decision making. That's the first virtue. That can lead you to the other virtues, which start with justice, which is rendering to others what is their due, which can lead you to fortitude, which is the ability to stand up to all that the world can throw at you when they try to dissuade you from living out those virtues, which can lead you into temperance, which is basically a reordering of all of those virtues that you had prior in order to ensure that one does not outstrip the other. Because let's say you're pursuing justice and ignoring prudence in doing so, that justice becomes vengeance and is then a vice, not a virtue. If you pursue fortitude at the expense of justice, then that fortitude becomes foolhardiness and again becomes a vice instead of being a virtue. And since temperance sort of backs up onto right reason and reorders it first and then all the others, I always think of these 5 things in a circular order. That is to say, kind of like dominoes. You have right reason, that's the first domino, and then the next domino is prudence, and then you have justice and fortitude and temperance. And they're all around in a circle, these dominoes going around in a circle. But there's this little thing, this tiny little domino that exists in between temperance and right reason. And it is the ability to see and understand yourself well enough in order to perceive the world around you, because you're using you in order to perceive what is around you in reality, and you must understand yourself well enough to do that in order to get to right reason. It's a part of temperance. And there's something that destroys completely this ability to do so. Now, what is this thing? Well, it's basically the idea that you can possess or own another individual. And yes, I know that...
Okay. But here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and say this and we'll keep going. we all agree slavery is wrong, and that's basically what he's discussing, slavery, because the idea of owning another person. And I use slavery because that's the way basically he uses this phrase, this idea. But it's not the best way, particularly in dealing with heroism. Now, Chainsaw Man is essentially a slave because he made a contract with a devil. Not the chainsaw one in his chest, but the girl he's working with or working for. I think she's control or power or something like that. So basically, RJ's argument will be that because Chainsaw Man is a slave, because he doesn't pursue freedom, he can't be a hero. There's nothing heroic about him if he can't make his own decisions in some way. But it's a flawed argument. Like I said, and I'm a huge fan of RJ, so this is kind of weird doing, but I'll let him continue, and we'll come back to this.
This part of virtue has developed and been expressed in very different ways over the millennia, and it's tied up with a lot of historical things. The idea of the difference between what a servant is and what a slave is. The idea that a lot of people throughout history didn't see them as enslaving other people because they didn't see slaves as people. All of these kinds of things are all tied up in that, and I don't have the time to go into that ball.
But here's the thing. We have to discuss why slavery is bad, why owning another person is. And of course the Christian argument, which is the main argument against what he's about to argue, is that all men are created in the eyes of, or in the image of God. That man is created in the image of God and should be cherished, and it's God who rules over all, and that you can't own another person because you're not God. That's where in the Western world this idea comes from, of not owning slaves, is because all men are created equal.
All of wax. But the point being is that human beings, by their nature, are meant to be free.
Okay. But going with that, not to, I didn't want to do this, but I will throw a cheap defense of a Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man, we're not just dealing with humans, we're dealing with demons and humans. And the idea is that possibly, like I said, I haven't read Chainsaw Man, but I'll make this argument anyway. Since you're not dealing with just humans, the argument that all people are created equally doesn't apply, because demons may not believe that and may not see that, and they may be right because it's a supernatural, circumstances. They may think that not all beings are created equal. They might think that they're better than humans,
To express this in a modern American way, we possess as human beings.
And with that, humans in this world may also believe that's true as well, such as the main character, which is why he's okay being a slave.
Beings, the unalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, liberty is right there in the middle. It comes right after life. That is to say, by virtue of you just being a human being, you have the right to be free. And
yeah, but again, where did we get that reasoning from? And we got it from Christianity, from Christian values, which don't value reason as its top virtue, which is the foundation of RJ's heroic idea. Which again, like, if he's not arguing Christianity, that's fine. But I mean, Christianity is a massive part of the Western tradition, and really how we define heroism more so than reason and prudence. Because, like, what defines these things? What makes these things good? If there's no God, that means there's no example for good to exist. Like, we know what examples of good and evil are, but what are good and evil examples of? So what are reason, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance? What are they examples of? Well, they're examples of good. Well, what's good an example of? God. Without God, these things don't mean anything. And with that, we'll get into some more stuff, but all this picture right here, I don't know if this is from the creator of Chainsaw Man, the artist, but that is a wonderful picture. That is awesome.
And if you do not believe that, which is a self-evident thing just by understanding your own existence and reality, if you can't understand that, then that destroys all of the other virtues. And by the way, I'll have to say, this is an inherent inherent evil, as they call it, which is to say, there is no circumstance, no matter how small, no matter what contingency that you can place upon it, that will make this into something good. You can't say, oh, they're not really people. You can't say, oh, I'm just possessing them for just a short amount of time. You can't say, oh, they're giving up their freedom to me, therefore it's okay. You can't say, oh, we're mutually possessing each other at the same time, therefore they cancel each other out.
All right, that last one you can push back on because that's exactly what love is. That's what marriage is. Marriage is two people being submissive to each other, to the whim of the other, to the will of the other forever, or until death do we part. Love is entering into servitude and or slavery. The Bible, actually, if we wanted to go full Christian argument with it, which I will, is slavery to one another. Is it willful? Yeah, that's what makes it harder. And again, I didn't want to do this, but it might be that in the Chainsaw Man universe, he's using the argument of people, of persons. Why would a demon care about people or persons? You know, we might just be like ants in their eyes. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's an argument.
No matter what, there is no condition whereby this can be seen as true. You cannot possess another human being. If you believe, even in the smallest, tiniest way, that you can do so, you do not understand one of the most basic rights that is essentially part of who you are as a human being, and therefore that destroys your ability to use your own self to understand reality around you, which destroys right reason within you, which then knocks over prudence, which then knocks over justice, which then knocks over fortitude, which then knocks over the rest of temperance. And so, if you believe this thing, that you can possess any human being, or that any human being can be possessed in any circumstance whatsoever, it destroys all of your ability to have any of the virtues whatsoever. And if
that I'm definitely going to push back on, because there have been people throughout history, in stories and in reality, unfortunately, because it's a terrible thing, who were slaves. They couldn't help it. They didn't want it, but they didn't have this reasoning that he is presenting. They were raised in cultures where they were always slaves. That's what they understood themselves, that was their definition of themselves. And that's a horrible, terrible thing, and it's wrong. But those people could still be virtuous because they were virtuous by every metric standard of any way you would look at it. They were virtuous and they were heroes and they were good people, or they could be, and many of them were. And we'll get to that in just a second.
If a hero is a paragon of virtue and you believe this thing, you are not a hero. And what happens with this kid? He accepts the fact that he's a slave. And even though he's the one that's being enslaved, he believes this. He accepts this fact. And in accepting this fact, it destroys his ability to be virtuous. And therefore, he is not a hero.
All right. And I'm making this video because I actually asked RJ about this, and I'm sure he's a busy dude. I know he's got stuff to do, but right here, I actually put it here, and this is going to be the core thing I want to discuss. I said, "Hi RJ, how does your idea of freedom versus slavery in regards to heroism account for biblical studies stories such as Daniel, Joseph, and Ezekiel? All were men who were undeniably heroic while accepting their positions because their God deemed it and gave them preference in the eyes of their rulers. Genuine question. Thanks for all your work." And like I said, I'm not trying to cause drama here. I would love to have a conversation with him, because people like this in the Judeo history, Daniel, Joseph, and Ezekiel, were all slaves. Daniel the prophet, Ezekiel the prophet, and Joseph, one of the patriarchs. They were slaves. So much so that Daniel was probably a eunuch. They may have even borne a brand of their master, and that's a horrible thing. But they accepted their lot in life because that's how they viewed the world. They viewed that their God had deemed this as punishment upon either them or their country, and they accepted it. And it was through that acceptance, through the will of their God that they actually grew and grew in power and in influence. I mean, Daniel and Joseph both were appointed the second hand to their respective kings. Joseph to Pharaoh, and Daniel to, was it Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon? And Ezekiel was given a place of power because he accepted and did his job well. Now, this is a great conflict with our modern Western view of freedom and virtues, as evidenced by this. But these men were heroic, and at least one of them, Joseph, saved his entire population of people, saved the Jews by saving the Egyptian people, because his wisdom and his willingness to work with Pharaoh and utilize Pharaoh's influence and power, he was able to gather grain and food enough to withstand a famine that his God told him about. He was undeniably a hero. He personified virtue, because even his first master, Potiphar, who was before he was sold to or sent to Pharaoh, Potiphar's wife tried to sleep with Joseph, and he ran from her because he's like, this is a disrespect to my master, and this is a disrespect to my God. This is a terrible thing. And he was imprisoned for it for, I think, 7 years, something ridiculous like that. And Daniel, was a slave to the king of Babylon, and he defied the king, but he never, in the way that he presented himself and his friends with their diet, he refused to eat food that was sacrificed to the gods of Babylon. And it was by that act that God rewarded Daniel as a higher place under the king. But he accepted his lot in life. And I'm not pushing for that. I'm just saying RJ is wrong to make this assumption, especially in the Western canon, because so much of the Western canon is built on these biblical principles and these biblical stories. Not only that, but I mean, all of Judaism has a massive foundation in this, and even that's what got their entire country through cycles of oppression and slavery, was that they excelled. The Israelites excelled at becoming moving in places of power under the kings that were ruling them, and it was to their benefit. So let's keep going with this. I mean, that's just, I wish I could think of more examples, but I know at least those three.
And here's where people would say, well, he's just a kid. He's only 14 to 16 years old. You can't expect him to know all these things. Yeah, I can. Number one, believe it or not, 14 to 16 is past the age of reason. He has reason enough for him to figure this out. Number two, Western civilization says, you see, other people can mitigate some of the evil things that you do. If you do bad things, there can be some mitigating circumstances that say not all of the blame goes on you because you are controlled by these other people or forced into doing so. But that doesn't mean all of the blame goes on those other people. You still share in the initial blame. It is still your fault. And again, this goes back to, as I'm always talking about, that definition of will that we have used since the 4th century AD. That yeah, at the end of the day, it's not these larger forces controlling you. At the end of the day, it's you and your will, and you choose where to go. You choose what to do. And if you accept this, it is your choice. It is your fault. Now, the punishment...
All right, give me just a second. I'll push back on that. I'll just let him finish.
Punishment for that fault, again, may be mitigated by the fact that you were possibly forced into doing so, but it's still your fault. And again, it's your fault because you have within you the ability to understand human existence and how it's supposed to actually work by nature of just being a human being. You don't have to be some giant intellectual to understand these concepts. You understand them simply through living life. And so you have the tools to do this.
All right, I will definitely push back on that. He is absolutely wrong. He is arguing from a Western perspective, particularly a Western philosophical, and I hate to say more modern perspective. And what I mean by modern is the last 2,000 years. But even to that, I mean, there are people born today in different countries where their entire life they are slaves. Their entire culture teaches them that. That is what they know. They can't just look around and know inherently that that's wrong. They can feel it. They can want to be free. But there's no reason, there's no way they could reason that the entire world is wrong, especially when it's beaten into them and their entire faith system is built on it. They have a caste system that they have to fight. How are these people, how is it that these people can't be virtuous still? They can't still be heroes while accepting this fact. Like, let's argue, let's use his reasoning here. He said reason is essentially being able to look at the world and deal properly with reality. Well, if your reality is you're a slave, that's right reasoning. It doesn't mean it's good or that it's right in a moral sense, but in regards to reality, that is 100% correct reasoning.
And apart from that, I'll just put it in a more colloquial kind of way. When that kid was given the chance to run, and by the way, he lives by himself in a shack, therefore he could run at any time that he wants. Even though the Yakuza would probably hunt him down and kill him, he has very little chance of surviving. Yeah, kid, take that chance. That would make you a hero in some small way. Take that chance. Not taking that chance, that's on you. Not running, that's your choice. I'm sure we all have different ways of expressing this, but I'll put it in the New England speak kind of way from my upbringing. Live free or die, kid. It's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And the fact that you can't see that, or that you have accepted a fate whereby you could run at any point and probably be killed, but you understand that you're going to be killed anyways by either starving to death or some demon is going to kill you because what they're forcing you to do, how is that even a choice that you need to think about? And the fact that a lot of people reading this, watching this, can't...
I get his point about, if you can leave, go for it. That's better for you in the long run. That doesn't mean you can't be virtuous if you accept your lot. Especially if you've tried running and you can't get away, and it would be worse, like supposedly for your family if you did get away. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't, the acceptance of, this has happened to people and it still happens to people. You are born into slavery. You're in a land that isn't your native land. You have no history anymore because your culture has been destroyed, ripped away from you. Maybe even the main language is something you don't speak anymore, or you never spoke. That's all you know. That's your reality. You can still be virtuous and a hero in that reality. Even if you do come to know that there's a difference, and you do come to reason that not only do you want to be free, but that you should be free morally, you can still be virtuous. I mean, this is like saying that you can't be virtuous in a gulag or in a concentration camp unless you're devoting all your time to trying to escape. That's insane. I mean, read Solzhenitsyn. You don't even have to read that, or Corrie ten Boom, these people that lived through hell and did their best to make hell a little bit less hellish for the people around them and stuck in it with them. It's almost impossible to find someone more heroic than Corrie ten Boom or the people described by Solzhenitsyn in the gulags.
Can't understand those simple points. Can't understand the point that this kid is not a hero, because we all have the ability to understand this simple point, because it's based upon, as I said, your ability to understand who you are as a human being, which you have the tools within you to understand because it's self-evident. And by the way, yes, I do understand what the term self-evident means and how it exists logically. I'm just saying that the capacity to do so for all those things to become self-evident is within you. Anyway, the fact that people can't understand this simple thing about being a hero is expressed in the second part of why I hate this story. And in order to tell you that, I'll tell you something a little bit about me. I had this mentor at one time who gave me many pieces of sage advice. And at one point, one of the most sage things he ever told me, well, it wasn't just me, he was talking to, well, the entire class. He said, beware of people who want to study evil. If you find someone who wants to study evil, get away from them as quickly as possible. Why? Because that's what evil wants. Evil wants you to study it. Evil wants you to become comfortable with its existence right in front of you, right next to you, right in your life. It wants you to be habituated, that is to say, to ingrain in you that habit of viciousness, of vice, of evil being right there in your life. And if you study what evil is and you put it there right next to you and look deeply into it time and time again, you are putting yourself into the habit of desensitizing yourself to it. He continued on and said, if you really want to understand what evil is, let's say because you want to combat evil, the way that you do that is by studying good. Because if you study good and understand wholeheartedly what good is, you will be able to see good wherever it is. And when you have the ability to do that, evil will stick out like a sore thumb, and you'll know exactly what it's up to. Now, his statement was a little bit anthropomorphic, certainly, with the Western understanding of what evil is, which I'll give you right now. Here's the thing with the Western understanding of good and evil. It's that good is a thing. It exists in reality as an objective thing, and you could think of it as the Christian God, or as the Aristotelian prime mover, or as the Platonic good. It doesn't matter.
It does matter because those are different definitions of good. And again, the reason I'm mentioning this is reason is not the highest virtue in Christianity, or through a lot of the Western canon of heroism. Faith and love are. And love in particular, as I've described earlier, is the willful submission to another. And that's a hard truth, but that's the example given when God came to earth and willfully died for people who hated him. That's the Christian canon. And it is very dangerous to try to separate the Christian canon from Western canon. It's almost impossible. Now, if you want to say, before 2000 AD, before the birth of Christ, good luck. Because the birth of Christ changed a lot of that. Clearly, because we're still dating history by his birth. So, he's arguing a specific view of heroism, which I think is ordinarily okay, but it's leaving out a lot. And it's leaving out a great deeper understanding of love and heroism, which is the willful acceptance of suffering, which is the definition of patience. Now, that doesn't mean a slave should always, just accept that they're a slave, but the Christian canon and the Jewish canon has heroes that did that. And those heroes are longer lasting and bigger titans of the faith and the Western canon, such as Jesus Christ, is a bigger titan of the Western canon than Aristotle and Plato. We do not date our years based on Aristotle and Plato. But like I said, I love RJ. I like his stuff a lot. I just had to push back on this one.
Exists in all of those ways as the same thing, an objective thing that exists. But evil is not an objective thing that exists. It's not a thing in itself at all. Evil is a state, according to Western civilization. And what state is that? It's the state of turning your back on and or moving away from what is good. And the point being that, what is this movement either towards or away from the good? How do you do that? Well, you move towards the good through the habit of virtue. You move away from the good through the habit of vice. And here,
Again, that's debatable with the Christian standard, and I wouldn't harp on it so much if Christianity was not a massive foundation of what we call Western civilization. There's different schools of thought in that within Christianity, such as God is the absolute, and He is what. There's a quote in the Bible that none are good except for God, and that you don't really get closer to God. You already either are with God or not through Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is the gateway to God. Maybe I'm being petty, but
here's the thing about stories like Chainsaw Man, because this is not the only story, certainly not the only story that I've come across with this pattern. It is a continual journey with despicable human beings.
so is the Bible. It's got some heroes, but it's got a lot of despicable people, and that's the entire point of it, is that it takes Christ to redeem those despicable people. King David, the single greatest hero of the Jewish tradition, probably more so than Abraham or Moses, even though they're considered the patriarchs. David is the king. He's the one that births the Messiah eventually, or the Messiah comes from him in their point of view. I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, despicable people. Yeah, even King David slept with a married man's wife and then had him murdered. And all of that is to show that humanity is despicable, humanity is fallen, and it needed Christ.
Who hold despicable ideas and do despicable things. And somebody might say in the comments, well, you never got to the end, and they flip the script right at the end so that the character does this or that and then becomes a hero. I don't care, because the whole point is that if you spend 20 or 50 or 100 chapters with despicable people doing despicable things and then say, oh no, I flipped the whole thing, so at the end it means something entirely different, you're wrong. It doesn't work that way. Why? Because those 20, 50, 100 chapters have habituated you to journey with these despicable people, accepting that despicable, vicious, and vile companionship of these people in your life that you...
All right, he's correct about some of that. You don't need to let toxic things into your life, and I hate using that term toxic. We'll say corrosive. But a lot of stories are catharsis, and again, I'm trying not to defend Chainsaw Man because I don't even know it. It's to show you what a horrible person is and how to avoid that. And not only that, it's to show you that evil doesn't pay. It's not that you like these horrible people. It's just that this is the story. Evil does triumph for a time, and then it's defeated. That's the story of humanity, of every single religion, basically, is that evil triumphs until it doesn't. So I'm pushing back on that just a little bit as well. I mean, for the most part, I agree. I think you should ingest things that are good for your soul, but something can be good for your soul if it shows justice, and the way to show justice is to show an injustice being corrected, and the only way to have that is to show an injustice. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna let him go through, and I'll be done.
actively seek out. And reading 10, 20, 50, 100 chapters like this, doesn't matter what happens at the end, doesn't matter if they flip the script, it's the same thing as studying evil. It's the same thing as making yourself habitually accustomed to the fact that evil is there.
Well, then, how would you write villains? How do you show evil being vanquished if you can't show evil? And maybe he's trying to say with Chainsaw Man that it stars so many bad people and they're shown in a positive light. I don't know, but if they get their just desserts at the end, I mean, that's just a good story. That's how do you have any villain at all? Especially an imposing villain if they aren't a powerful presence throughout the story. All right, now maybe I'm just getting a little, maybe I'm just picking hairs here, but or splitting hairs here, but anyway.
You're becoming okay with it being there within your life, that you'll journey with it, which again is the exact thing that evil wants you to do. So what am I saying? Am I saying that these stories shouldn't exist to begin with? Am I saying we should get rid of these stories? No, I'm saying that in a sane and rational world, these stories would die on the shelf. But
we don't live in a sane and rational world.
Apparently, we don't live in a sane and rational world, not even close to it.
And throughout history will show you that we never have.
The fact that this story appears to be widely accepted and popular just goes to show how many people, especially young people, don't have the capacity to even use the elements that are essentially within their own being to understand their own existence.
Now that I don't know, man. I mean, it just looks cool. Like I don't like I said, I'm not a big fan of Chainsaw Man. I don't like it. Maybe I could like it, but I mean, just look at it. The dude looks like Wolverine on steroids, and there's a chick here with a huge rack with a scythe. I mean, we've got one of those in our own books before we even saw Chainsaw Man because that's a great combination. It just looks cool. I mean, like I said, I kind of wish I liked it, but I mean, I can't. I think it looks great. Maybe I should get into it. But kids like cool stuff, man. I mean, kids like Wolverine, and Wolverine is a pretty unsavory dude who deals with unsavory people. I mean, X-Force is the same way, like Cable and all these guys. I mean, a lot of soldiers aren't good people. You know, how do you tell a war story? I mean, you got a lot of soldiers that are doing something for a quote-unquote greater good, but a lot of they're not usually great people, or sometimes they are, but you know what I mean? I get that you need old school heroes. I agree, and I think virtue is a wonderful thing. Of course, I'm a Christian. I love seeing that stuff, but reality is reality, and if you want to prepare kids for reality, you got to show them that evil triumphs for a bit and then loses. That's just the unfortunate structure of our world.
And why? Well, I would say, going back to what I talked about at the first, when I was rambling on about anime and manga. It used to be that being a kid, somewhere between a little child and...
All right. Yeah, he's going back to some points from the beginning. It's a good video. I would, or like I said, RJ always does a wonderful job articulating his thoughts, even if one doesn't agree with his conclusions. He always has a great bolstering argument. And I had to listen to this like 2 or 3 times to fully articulate mine against his, because he's very good at it. But I think I've done a pretty good job. I would love to talk with him or anyone else about this stuff. And anyway, I'll try not to keep you too long, but see ya.